again to Mondays with Mike. It is not a snowy Monday, but it is kind of a dreary and somewhat drizzly Monday. Boy, what a difference a week makes. Last week was incredible. It was, in some ways, just like a once in a generation, memory maker, definitely. But at the same time was, a little bit, I would say, scary, especially as cold as we got. For the morning low temperatures, it was really incredible. The low teens that we saw across the area, and all-time record lows that were set across an area from Beaumont over to Louisiana. Single-digit low temperatures. I mean, the kind of thing that hadn't been seen in over a century, if not longer. But we did have, some really good times. It was long and hard here at Fox 26 with a lot of long days, a lot of hours on the air and on our streaming platforms like this. But I suppose it was all worth it when I was on my way home, and as tired as I was, saw some kids that were sledding down a hill in our neighborhood that was actually like on a golf course. It was one of the holes, and so I said, you know what, as much as I want to go home and just crash in bed, because it was like 2:30 in the afternoon, called ahead to my wife and I said, tell everybody get dressed real quick, put on a jacket, get shoes, we're going sledding. We, of course, don't own a sled. So I'm like, what could we use? I'm like looking all around the garage, and we ended up using the top, like a Tupperware container top or like a plastic container top. Used one of those, and we went, and it was kind of working, but it wasn't working like great. And then one of the other dads there said, you got to put something around it that makes it more slippery. So like a trash bag works. So I ran home, got a big black trash bag, put it in there, and that did the trick, and it really helped. By then, though, the snow was getting kind of torn up, and it was like snowy, icy, and muddy kind of thing. But it was still a really memorable experience, snowball fights and things like that. I honestly, though, I don't really throw the snowballs at the girls. I let them, especially my youngest, throw it at me, because I'm afraid I'm going to hit her. I would feel guilty, but that's just the way I am. But anyway, it was really, really cool. The most amazing memory, actually, that I have of our on-air coverage was Sally and Lena, because amazingly, when we were planning the day, we had meetings and meetings and meetings. I can't tell you how many meetings, emails, text messages. Oh, if I had to do another meeting. But we were planning where we were going to send crews. We had to send crews there, a crew meaning like a photographer and a reporter, ahead of time to sort of pre-stage them, because we knew, or we anticipated, that you probably weren't going to be able to drive to these places. And so, we had crews set up in the Woodlands, and we might have had somebody set up down in Galveston County somewhere, and maybe in the Sugar Land area. And so they were pre-positioned there, but Sally McDonald had the vision, the foresight to say, we're going to go sledding, her and Lena, when the sun comes up. And we're like, what? Are you kidding? Sledding? So they went to Eleanor Tinsley Park, and sure enough, it wasn't just their idea. I mean, it was like the city came out. It shocked me. In a good way. There was a guy down there skiing, like literally on skis, and lots of people were out there with different modes of, apparatus to slide on. And Sally and Lena went down the hill a couple times. I'm not aware that anybody got seriously injured, but it was close, definitely close. But so that was very cool. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very fun, but also at the same time, it was like, what in the world is happening here? I was on the air, obviously anticipating the snow, but at the same time, when I saw a blizzard warning was put into effect for Beaumont, a blizzard warning for Port Arthur, Texas, and Orange, Texas, and Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Lafayette, Louisiana, were all under a blizzard warning. I'm like, okay, I have to look it up. This has never happened before. And sure enough, the National Weather Service in Lake Charles, which covers that area, said this is the first time in their history that office has ever issued a blizzard warning. Now, the office was established in the early 20th century, originally in Beaumont, and it wasn't even the National Weather Service back then. It was called the Weather Bureau. So first time, over the 100-year existence of that organization, they've ever issued a blizzard warning for that part of the world. So I'm going to tell you about some records that were set around the Gulf Coast region, some really impressive things you may not have heard about. And in addition, so we'll talk about also the pattern change that's taking hold that's going to kind of bring us back toward a slightly warmer pattern. We'll talk about some severe thunderstorm chances this week, not involving snow. And then also I want to talk about, I saw an article, this actually started being talked about a few years ago. And then I saw some headlines again last year, and then some recent headlines again. Most of the time, by the way, happens in the wintertime. But it has to do with jet aircraft crossing the Atlantic Ocean and getting this incredible boost in ground speed that gets you from the U.S. to Europe or other points eastward in an incredible amount of time. So we'll talk about that, what causes that, coming up here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and begin, though, with a look at some of the snowfall records and low temperature records. So I want to talk to you about these just incredible, difficult to believe amounts of snowfall and incredible amounts, incredible temperature drops that we had across the area. So what I want to show you is how much snow fell, and also how cold the temperatures got, and the incredible temperature swings that we experienced across the area. Let me go ahead and move the camera just a little bit closer to make sure you can see. You're going to see my ring light on there too. But this is a look at snowfall totals from not just here in the Houston area. This is off to our east, because as much snow as we got here in Houston, as amazing as it was, there was a literal blizzard out to our east. And some people did ask me a really, really good question online when I mentioned that there was a blizzard warning that was in effect for Beaumont, and a blizzard warning in effect for Lake Charles. And they said, well, what exactly constitutes a blizzard? Well, at least around here, the weather office in Lake Charles, which is in charge of Beaumont, Orange, Port Arthur, Lake Charles, and over to Lafayette and the Vermilion Bay area, they defined it as the fact that they had 35-mile-per-hour winds or higher, heavy snow, and also reduced visibilities to a quarter mile or less. So you had, you couldn't see very far down the road. The snow was blowing sideways, and so that was what they, issued the blizzard warning for. And I tell you what, they were right to do so, because when you look at some of these snowfall totals, it was insane. I want to start out, though, with a look at Florida, because the Florida Panhandle had an incredible amount of snow, way more snow than we did, which is like hard to believe, right? So in Milton, Florida, which is located just north of Pensacola, so Pensacola is like right on the water, and just inland around a bay area, and then just north of that, you find Milton, Florida, which also, interestingly enough, had the previous Florida record of 4 inches of snow. Now get this, 10 inches of snow in Milton, Florida. The previous record all time was 4 inches. So talk about just completely unprecedented, at least since we've been keeping records over the last, I don't know how far the records go back there. I mean, at least to the 1800s. So yeah, amazing. 10 inches of snow fell in Milton, Florida. New Orleans had 10 inches, which unofficially tied their previous record that happened in 1895, which is also the same snowstorm that brought us our all-time record of 20 inches of snow in Houston and 15 inches of snow in Galveston. Valentine's Day, 1895. Chalmette, Louisiana, was just right adjacent to New Orleans, just one of those little towns around New Orleans. 11.5 inches of snow, hard to believe. The previous record, again, was 10 inches. Lake Charles, Louisiana had 4.8, so we'll round that up to 5 inches, about 5 inches of snow there. Lafayette got hit with an absolute Cajun blizzard, 10 inches of snow just south of there. New Iberia, Louisiana, 8 inches of snow. Mobile, Alabama had 7.5 inches of snow. And Pensacola had 8.9 inches of snow. Just unbelievable snowfall amounts. Now, as far as what we had here locally in the Houston area, LaPorte was, now these are all like unofficial totals. These are basically like storm reports that were sent in, but they need to be substantiated somehow. Like the National Weather Service will ask the folks, how did you measure it, that kind of thing. And so they are somewhat vetted, but you wouldn't bet $1 million on it, but they're probably pretty accurate. LaPorte, 6 inches of snow. Baytown had 5.5. Pearland had 4. The Third Ward area of Houston had 4 inches of snow. Richmond had 4 inches. West U had a little bit more than 3. Hobby Airport had 3, which, by the way, was the heaviest snow there since 1960. The Woodlands had about roughly 2.5 inches of snow, and Bush Airport actually only picked up 1.2. Now, that's complicated because Bush Airport is the official observation site for Houston. So when you look back at the history books, unless you really look and parse through the data, it's going to show that Houston only had 1.2 inches last week. But it was obviously a lot more than that. And even when you go back to the snow that we had, that I recall in 2004, that was the Christmas Eve snow that we had. Houston itself all had paltry amounts, maybe an inch, and then like parts of Fort Bend and Brazoria County had like 2 or 3 or 4 inches of snow, and then you actually went farther south to Wharton County and Matagorda County, and they had like almost a foot of snow. So it kind of formed along a streak there, and that's the way this turns out to happen sometimes. Now, unreal record low temperatures. This is incredible. Now, in Houston, we did set a record for the day at Hobby Airport. We got down to 18 degrees. The record, or excuse me, the temperature that was observed at Bush Intercontinental was 20. So, technically our low for the day was 20, but Hobby hit 18. And there were a lot of other places unofficially across the area, like down around Dickinson and Santa Fe and like Texas City, that were down to like 15 degrees. There were a lot of locations that got in on the snow a little bit later in the day, through Monday and Tuesday, and then just incredible. So these were the records that were set. Beaumont got down to 11. Lake Charles, that was an all-time record low of 6. Lafayette, all-time record low, 4. Now, New Iberia, I don't know if you've ever been to New Iberia, but I mean, you're driving south of Lafayette toward the coastline, where you're getting into the bayou there. 2 degrees Fahrenheit for a low. Baton Rouge hit 7. Gulfport, Mississippi, which, I mean, it's like right on the Gulf of Mexico, right? 7 degrees. Mobile, 6, and Pensacola, Florida hit 13. So this is like a, once in a generation, maybe twice in a century kind of event, maybe even once in a century kind of event when you look at some of these low temperatures. Now, I had the idea to make this graphic and to look this up based on something that like Delon and Melissa were saying this morning, which is like, these temperature swings is kind of like only in Texas do you see anything like this. And yes, we did have some huge temperature swings in Texas, and we do have some incredible temperature swings every winter in Texas, but it does happen in other places. So I wanted to show you this. I compared the low temperature in the middle of last week to the low temperature on yesterday, depending on when you're watching this, on Sunday. Hobby Airport had that low of 18 and got all the way up to 77 degrees yesterday. That's a 59-degree rise in temperatures. Beaumont went from a low to 11 to a high of 75 from Wednesday to Sunday. That's a 64-degree temperature swing. Lake Charles really had the biggest swing from 6 to 73. That's amazing. I mean, there was literally like thick snow on the ground to tropical-like temperatures there. 67-degree rise there. Lafayette went from a low of 4 to a high of 70. That's a 66-degree rise in temperatures. New Iberia went from 2 to 69. That's a 67-degree rise. And finally, Baton Rouge, Louisiana went from 7 to 70. You believe it? From 7 to 70. So these things, it's like almost hard to believe that this happened looking back, especially when we made it into the 70s in parts of the Houston area yesterday. This week, it's going to be kind of more like, Instead of huge ups and downs, it's just be kind of steady, not really too many big changes. I did want to talk about sort of transitioning right now from the talk of cold weather to the chance for some severe weather or heavy rain. So what you're looking at here, so Houston's over here, and the Los Angeles area, which of course we know has been just, I guess now, it still is a bigger weather story. Like the blizzard locally was probably, the story of the year by far, the story of the last several years. But out in Southern California, we know the tragedy that's happened out there. Some estimates of like $150 billion in damage, 10 or 12,000 structures destroyed. Maybe it's more than that from the fires, right? Well, now they've gotten in actually on some heavy rain. They had some heavy rain over the weekend, especially on Sunday, and they're still getting some rain out there today from that upper level area of low pressure that you see spinning here. This is up at the jet stream level. This is leading to the threat for mudslides over there. And the reason I'm showing you this is that that same system is moving toward Texas. And this almost always happens. We have this west to east motion of the jet stream winds and west to east movement of areas of low pressure and fronts and things like that during the wintertime. And so that system is headed over our way. Now, coming up on Wednesday, we're looking for this light mint green color, means that severe weather is unlikely, but it means it's what's called the general thunderstorm risk area. So we could have some thunderstorms here. We probably will have some thunderstorms here on Wednesday. That yellow area is the area that's at the highest risk for seeing severe thunderstorms. So that's out there around Fredericksburg and surrounding areas out in the hill country. And there's a slightly lower risk, but still a risk from San Antonio and Austin all the way up to Dallas. So that means heavy rain, but also a chance for some storms that could produce hail or high winds. Here's a closer look at that. Austin, San Antonio, Temple, Texas, and Waco, all in that area of the possible risk, and then a higher risk heading out there toward the west. Now, we're fast forwarding ahead now to Thursday. Now, this is a product that's released by NOAA's Weather Prediction Center known as the Excessive Rainfall Outlook. So what are the chances of seeing flooding taking place if you were to draw a circle, and the circle is 25 miles in radius? It's so hard to explain. The way I like to explain it is it's approximately the size of any given county. Just in general, pick a county here, give or take, that's about the size that we're talking about here. There's about a 5% chance in any one of these given counties, like Harris County, Montgomery County, and Liberty County, and so forth, of seeing some flooding taking place on Thursday. So that's definitely something to watch. It's not a huge risk, but I do think we'll have some pretty heavy downpours here coming up on Thursday. So it's definitely something for us to watch. Now, I want to talk about something really, really interesting. And for that, I'm going to break out something I haven't used for too long. And that's the good old whiteboard. All right, now for something that I found fascinating. You might have heard some headlines about it, and it has to do with the speed of jet airplanes moving across the Atlantic Ocean, kind of record-breaking speeds. What is this all about? How is that possible? Well, here's what happened last week. So the jet stream is this described as a river of air moving across the high parts of the atmosphere. It reaches its peak up around the point in the atmosphere where jet aircraft fly. They usually cruise like 37,000 feet, 39,000 feet, something like that, which is near the top of the part of the atmosphere we call the tropopause. And they fly there because it's sort of like a middle point where they have enough air for the engines, and to do their combustion. They have enough air for the wings to create lift, but at the same time, the air is thin enough that there's not as much resistance and they could zoom through it at a really high rate. Well, when you fly through the jet stream, like right here, the faster the jet stream is blowing, the more of a tailwind you have. And this is where it gets a little confusing, and I'll tell you why. Because the news report that I read, and this was in a few different sources, British Airways, the British Airways Flight 274 was an Airbus A350, and it reached a ground speed, which I'll talk about here in a second, but a ground speed of 814 miles per hour. So that's faster than the speed of sound, technically. But the record here, or at least the recent high speed, went to Qatar Airways. Qatar, however you want to pronounce it. Can't pronounce it. See, the thing is, people who are not native Arabic speakers can't pronounce it correctly most of the time, so it's tough to try. There's a guttural pronunciation that even if I tried to do it, I couldn't do. But anyway, so Qatar Airways Flight 704, 833 miles per hour. Well, how do you go 833 miles per hour? The speed of sound is just over 700 miles per hour. So I have the whiteboard. You know how I love this, right? I haven't broken out the whiteboard here for like months, right? I don't think I've, maybe many months. So here's the deal. So let's suppose there's no wind at all, okay? So here's the ground. Let me make sure that I'm drawing this so that y'all can see it. So here's the ground. Here's you, okay? And you're happy. I'll give you a little smile there. Okay, so there's you. And there's an airplane flying up here. Gosh, I gotta draw. I didn't realize I was gonna be drawing this airplane just right here on the spot. How do you like that? So there's my airplane, right? We'll give it a little engine here. So the airplane is flying along this way. Let me move this closer. So you're moving this way. Let's say you're going, they use knots, but I'm gonna use miles per hour, okay? So let's say this is 500 mph, or knots if you want to. So if there is no wind, let's just say no wind, it's completely neutral. Well, then the airplane, the airspeed is going to indicate to the pilot, okay, you're going 500 miles an hour. Now it does get more complicated. There's a thing called indicated airspeed. I'm not a pilot, but let's just say that their airspeed is 500 miles per hour. Well, the speed on the ground here, not you, but the plane relative to the ground is also going to be 500 miles per hour. Okay, so that's in a very rare situation that there's no wind. But if you take, let's see, let's be more realistic of the 777 and the Airbus A350 that were involved in what I was telling you about. So they cruise, they use what's called Mach speed. Mach is the name for a scientist named Mach. It's the speed of sound. Now, it's very important, by the way, that commercial jet aircraft don't break the speed of sound. The airplanes are not designed to break the speed of sound. My tie is messed up. The planes are not designed to break the speed of sound. They also have to make sure they don't get too close to the speed of sound, because then if they turn, like the wingtips or something might accidentally break the speed of sound. So they don't want that to happen. So anyway, they cruise at like a Mach, like let's say like 0.8 of the speed of sound, approximately. So that's like, give or take, about 600 miles per hour. So this is moving at 600 miles per hour, right? I hope you can see that. So this is moving at like 600, but in the case after we had the big winter storm, the jet stream was so strong that the jet was blowing at about 200 miles per hour in the same direction. So let's see, one of the flights took off, I think, from New York and was going to Doha, Qatar, and it made it there about an hour ahead of schedule. There was also a flight that went from, gosh, was it DC? Anyway, it went from the US over to Europe, and it landed about an hour ahead of schedule, because you add these together, you add these relative speeds. So the plane relative to the air, what the wings are feeling is 600 miles per hour. But then they have this tailwind of 200. So it's actually moving at 800 miles per hour. Which you may be wondering, okay, well, isn't that breaking the speed of sound? Because the speed of sound is about 700 and some change. It is not breaking the speed of sound. The ground speed here, which is what they were talking about, I have my notes down there. So this British Airways flight 274, 814 miles per hour with respect to the ground. And the Qatar Airways 777, 833 miles per hour with respect to the ground. But with respect to the air, it's only moving at about 600. So to the airplane, to the pilot, to the wings, all of the forces that have to go into keeping the airplane flying, they feel 600. But the whole mass itself, including the air, is moving at over 800. And it's important to remember this because the only supersonic passenger plane, well, there was one in Russia, Tupolev Tu-144, I think is what it was called. From what I understand, it was a piece of junk. And the Concorde, of course, was the plane that we all associated with flying supersonic. It was around in the 70s and 80s, and it turned out to be decommissioned because it was dangerous. There were two major crashes, but that's the only one that's designed to actually fly supersonic. The 777 and these other passenger planes are absolutely not designed to do that. But if you catch the jet stream here on just the right day, and by the way, the airlines do have meteorologists that help with the flight planning, and they can save a ton of fuel if they ride right there in the jet stream. They arrive where they're getting, like to London or wherever, they arrive there faster. They save a lot of fuel going from the United States over to Europe, or from the United States over to the Middle East, or any of those spots. Now, you may be asking a very good question. What happens on the way back? Yeah, it can take an hour longer. They would probably route around this strongest part of the jet stream. They probably want to avoid that, but either way, you're going to have headwinds and you're going to end up going slower. So just like I explained to you, going 600 miles an hour this way with a 200 mile per hour tailwind, you go 800. It's the opposite way. You know, you would have to subtract your ground speed if you had a strong headwind. So I came across that story and I thought it was amazing that you could go 833 miles per hour, but it does not change the speed of the air. You're just being helped along by a crazy strong jet stream that was caused by the winter storm. Or that caused the winter storm. So anyway, I got to use the whiteboard there for a second. Hope I didn't bore you too much. Have a great day. Thanks so much for watching Mondays with Mike, and shout out to my mom and Neil down in Florida. Hope you enjoyed the little cool off. Too bad you missed out on the snow.